You're thinking about getting a PhD, and that brings up the big question for a lot of people. Should you do it in India or should you go abroad? It's a huge decision, especially with India's higher education system just exploding in size. Okay, let's get into it and try to figure out if a PhD in India is the right move for you.
Just to give you a sense of scale, let's start with a number. 1,072. As of 2022, that's how many universities India has. It makes its higher education system one of the largest on the planet, which means, there's a massive variety of specializations you can get into.
But here's the thing, with that enormous size comes a whole lot of complexity. Your experience can be completely different depending on where you go, from a truly world-class research facility to an institution that's, well, really struggling. So this is the main question we're going to try to answer in this explainer. What's the promise and what's the reality?
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the big picture of India's PhD landscape. Then we'll get into the practical stuff, how you actually get in. After that, we'll compare the different kinds of universities, dig into the nationwide R&D challenges, and finally, take a look at what the future might hold for research.
All right, first up, let's talk about the appeal. Why are so many aspiring researchers even considering doing their doctorate in India in the first place? Well, it really comes down to a few very compelling reasons.
So what's the big draw? Well, number one, for sure, is affordability. The tuition fees can be just a tiny fraction of what you'd be paying in the US or Europe. Then you've got the huge range of subjects to study, plus the comfort of being in a familiar cultural environment. And on top of all that, you're not necessarily giving up on prestige anymore, with places like the IITs really starting to climb up those global rankings.
Okay, so let's say you're interested. How do you actually get in? Let's unpack the whole admission process.
You can really think of the whole journey in three main steps. First, you got to have the right qualifications, and that usually means a master's degree. Next, you have to pass one of the national entrance exams. And finally, if you get through that, you've got to ace the interview, which is often called a viva voce.
Now, these national entrance exams are absolutely central to the whole process. The big one is the National Eligibility Test, or NET. If you do really, really well, we're talking top percentile, you can be awarded something called a Junior Research Fellowship, or JRF. And this is a huge deal because it not only gives you a monthly stipend to live on, but it often lets you skip the written test and go straight to the interview stage. It's a massive advantage.
Let's make this more concrete with a real-world example from a top university, Jawaharlal Nehru University, or JNU. You can see the traditional route is a master's with at least 55% marks. But look, there's also a newer path for people with a 4-year bachelor's, as long as you have a high score of 75%. But either way you go, your admission is probably going to hinge on that NET score or whether you've managed to land that JRF.
Now, if you're an international student, the process is a bit different. You'll usually apply through a special portal, and the most critical part is getting a research visa. You'll almost always need to submit a detailed research proposal, and your admission isn't actually final until you have that visa in hand.
So, let's say you've made it through that whole complex admissions process. What's actually waiting for you on the other side? This is where things get really interesting, because the reality on the ground can be dramatically different depending on the type of university you end up at.
If you look at the mix of universities in India, it's dominated by state-level institutions, both public and private. Together, they make up over 80% of all universities. The really famous, centrally funded universities, they're actually a pretty small slice of the pie. And this is so important because the kind of university you're at will totally shape your PhD experience.
So let's start with the promise. This data from a government report shows that private universities are actually leading the way in technology commercialization, turning research into actual products. Now, that might be because they have closer ties to industry, or maybe they're just more nimble and can get things done without all the red tape.
But then, there's the other side of the coin. The reality. This quote from a Reddit user about their private university experience paints, a very different picture. It speaks to this deep frustration over high fees and a feeling that they're just seen as a source of income, not as a scholar. It really just highlights how much the quality can vary.
So here's the bottom line. It's a trade-off. Public universities, they often have lower fees and a solid established reputation, but you might get bogged down by bureaucracy. Private universities, on the other hand, might offer shiny new labs and great industry connections, but you're going to pay for it, and the quality can be a total gamble.
Okay, Let's zoom out from the individual universities for a minute, because the entire research ecosystem in India is facing some really big systemic challenges. This isn't just about one school or another, it's about the whole national environment for research and development.
For years now, India has had a national goal of spending 2% of its GDP on R&D, but the reality? That number has been stuck at around 0.7%. That gap between the ambition and the actual money being spent is a huge fundamental problem that just starves the whole research sector of funds.
And this chart shows a really key difference in how things work. In India, the government is the main source of R&D money. That's the complete opposite of what you see in places like the US or South Korea, where businesses are the ones driving innovation. And that has a massive impact on the kind of research that gets funded and what gets prioritized.
These funding issues then create this ripple effect of other problems. You have faculty members who are just completely overloaded with teaching classes, leaving them with practically no time for their own research. On top of that, you have bureaucratic red tape that can stall a promising project for months while you're waiting on approvals. And, of course, there's the ongoing brain drain, with some of India's best and brightest researchers leaving for opportunities abroad.
So, with all these challenges, what's being done to fix things? In our last section, let's look at the big ideas and policies that are supposed to shape a better future for research in India.
The big answer here is the National Education Policy of 2020. This is a really ambitious plan that's aiming for a complete overhaul of the Indian education system, and it has a special focus on trying to build a really vibrant, world-class research culture.
And it's not just talk. The policy lays out a pretty clear roadmap. It's calling for dedicated R&D cells in every single university to help manage research professionally. It suggests giving faculty real incentives, like grants and research leave, to fix that teaching-research imbalance. And it's really pushing for stronger partnerships with industry, hoping to make research more practical, innovative, and maybe even profitable.
And that brings us full circle. There's no question India has immense talent and new, bold ambitions. But those old challenges, the funding, the bureaucracy, they haven't gone away. So the real question isn't whether India can become a research powerhouse, it's whether it can overcome these stubborn hurdles to finally turn all that potential into a reality. Only time will tell if this new roadmap actually leads to where it's supposed to go.